The village seemed like any other on a quiet morning, the kind of place where life moved slowly, and neighbors knew each other by name. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, children's laughter echoed through the narrow streets, and the scent of fresh bread lingered in the air. Farmers tended their fields, and the simple routines of daily life carried on as if the world beyond the hills didn't exist. There was no hint that in just a few hours, everything would vanish, leaving behind only silence and devastation. People went about their chores, unaware that the ordinary sounds of life, the creak of a door, the chatter of a market, the clatter of tools, were about to be replaced by chaos and fear that would never fade from memory. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, as distant rumblings that some might have mistaken for a storm approaching. Animals grew restless, and the air seemed charged with a strange tension, though no one could say why. There was a sense of normalcy that clung stubbornly to the village, a comforting illusion that life, with all its small certainties, would continue uninterrupted. But history had other plans. In the space of hours, the routines that had defined the village for generations would be ripped away. Homes that had stood for decades, streets that had witnessed countless celebrations and quiet evenings, would be reduced to rubble. The rhythm of life, steady and reassuring, would be shattered in an instant, leaving an emptiness that could never be replaced. As the first signs of the attack appeared, confusion spread like wildfire. People ran, shouted, searched for loved ones, trying desperately to make sense of what was happening. The peaceful village, once a haven of safety and familiarity, transformed into a landscape of terror. Windows that had reflected sunlight and warmth now reflected fire and destruction. Fields that had nourished families now bore the scars of violence. The sheer abruptness of the event left no time for preparation, no chance for defense, no possibility of escape. In those terrifying hours, the ordinary became extraordinary in the worst possible way, and every villager's understanding of their world was irrevocably altered. And yet, amidst the devastation, there is a haunting beauty in remembering how ordinary life once was. The quiet smiles, the familiar streets, the sense of community, all of it existed only hours before being wiped away. By reflecting on those final moments of calm, viewers can truly grasp the enormity of what was lost, and the shocking reality of how quickly life can change when the forces of war descend upon the unsuspecting. In those fleeting hours, the village lived fully, oblivious to the storm that awaited, and that very innocence makes the story all the more poignant and heartbreaking. Life in the village was more than routines and streets, it was the people, their stories, their quiet moments, and the connections that bound them together. Mothers hummed lullabies as they worked, fathers guided children through small lessons, and neighbors leaned on each other through both joy and hardship. The war that raged beyond the hills was a distant rumble for most, something they had heard of but never truly faced. In their daily lives, there was laughter, the kind that bubbles up naturally from shared meals and games in the dirt streets, and small acts of kindness that went unnoticed yet quietly shaped the rhythm of the village. These ordinary moments are easy to overlook in history books, but they are precisely what makes the tragedy that followed so unbearable, because it wasn't just buildings that would be destroyed, it was a community, a tapestry of lives woven together over generations. When the first signs of destruction appeared, the villagers were thrown into chaos. Parents clutched their children, friends searched for one another in panic, and neighbors tried to offer what comfort they could even as fear took hold. The stories of individuals and families, of people with hopes and dreams, were interrupted in an instant. There was no warning long enough to prepare for the loss, no chance to safeguard treasured possessions, no time to process what was happening. Every scream, every desperate call, every hurried movement carried the weight of uncertainty and terror. And yet, in those moments, the resilience and humanity of the villagers shone through. People guided each other to safety, shared food and water, and offered solace even when their own hearts were breaking. Among the chaos, there are accounts that linger because they reveal the stark contrast between life and its abrupt end. A father shielding his children, a neighbor helping an elderly woman escape collapsing buildings, a young couple clinging together as the world fell apart around them. These are not just historical details but vivid snapshots of human courage and love. Each life carried its own story, and every story was abruptly threatened by forces beyond their control. These narratives remind viewers that the cost of war is not abstract. It is measured in the shattered routines of daily life, in the loss of laughter, in the sudden absence of familiar faces, and in the grief that lingers long after the echoes of violence have faded. And yet, remembering these lives is crucial. By imagining the small joys that filled the village before disaster struck, the shared meals, the games in the street, the quiet conversations at sunset, we begin to understand the depth of what was lost. The tragedy is amplified not only by the destruction itself but by the lives interrupted, the potential cut short, and the bonds severed. These were real people with real stories, and in telling them, the memory of the village lives on. Their experiences, fleeting yet profound, allow viewers to connect emotionally with history, to feel not just the scale of destruction, but its human weight. In this way, the story of the village becomes more than a moment in a history book, it becomes a reminder of what it means to be human, and what is at stake when life as we know it disappears in an instant. The destruction of the village cannot be understood in isolation. It was part of a much larger web of events, a chapter in the vast, brutal story of World War II, where entire communities became pawns in battles that stretched far beyond their borders. For the villagers, the war may have seemed distant, almost abstract, but the decisions made in far-off command centers would ripple through their lives with catastrophic consequences. Armies moved, strategies unfolded, and political ambitions collided, all while ordinary people went about their days, unaware that their village had been marked by history for destruction. This larger context is essential, because it reminds us that the tragedy was not random, it was the result of forces that were relentless, calculated, and indifferent to human life. The soldiers who arrived in the area were executing orders dictated by strategy, but their actions had profoundly human consequences. Villages like this one were often caught between advancing fronts, supply lines, and punitive operations. What might have been seen by commanders as tactical objectives were, in reality, homes filled with families, streets filled with laughter, and fields that sustained generations. The mechanics of war, maps, troop movements, and military objectives, clashed brutally with the rhythms of civilian life, leaving destruction and loss in their wake. Understanding this tension between the scale of the conflict and the intimacy of the village is crucial. It shows how historical events are not abstract concepts but lived realities for people who had no voice in the decisions that sealed their fate. Beyond the immediate devastation, the larger historical context also reveals patterns that were tragically common during the war. Many villages experienced similar fates, and the scale of loss across Europe and beyond was staggering. The village's destruction is a lens through which we can glimpse the enormity of the war's impact on civilians, how quickly a life built over generations could vanish, and how ordinary routines could be shattered by forces beyond anyone's control. It forces viewers to confront the harsh truth that history is not just shaped by leaders and armies, but also by the countless unnamed individuals whose lives were uprooted or ended in the course of conflict. And yet, situating the village within this broader historical framework also underscores the resilience of memory. By examining why and how such events occurred, we honor the victims' experiences and preserve the lessons they leave behind. The village may have disappeared physically, but its story is a testament to the fragility of peace and the profound consequences of political and military decisions. It reminds viewers that history is not only about dates and battles but about the human lives entwined in them, the hopes, fears, and losses that give history its weight. In understanding the larger forces at play, we see how ordinary people became part of an extraordinary historical moment, and why remembering their experiences matters. The village's disappearance was not just an isolated tragedy, it was a fragment of the immense upheaval that shaped the world, a haunting reminder that life, no matter how ordinary it seems, can be altered in an instant by the tides of history.